For me personally, I felt like I was intruding. Like it was so weird because it was like, oh my God, like I'm listening to somebody that I know. It was scary because you feel you're so close to it.
Welcome to 101, a podcast for young women interested in careers in film and TV.
We'll sit down with industry professionals, ask them your questions, and get the answers you need to know.
101, it's a beginning.
Caroline, where are you? I see
I'm
you're
in
in a hotel room.
Marfa, Texas.
Hey, I've been there. Yeah.
And I just had the craziest Annie Mae run-in experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I was in this really cool store that sells, it's literally called like the Rock Shop. Like it sells rocks. And I was talking to the guy who runs it, and he goes, he's like, oh, I grew up, like, I don't know how it came up. There was something from the Black Hills that was for sale.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, that's so cool. That's so interesting. I said, oh, I just worked on a project that's related to South Dakota. And he's like, oh, I grew up in Rapid City. And his mother was from Rosebud.
What?
And he knew all about it. He's like, oh, Annie Mae. Yep. I know the story. Yep. Oh, it's a crazy story. Like he knew all about it.
That is wild.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, that is really cool. Oh my God. How
Never
awesome.
a dull moment. Never a dull moment.
Exactly.
Never a dull moment.
But it's very par for the course with this project where there's like a magic energy around the thing that keeps sort of providing things like that. It's very remarkable. Anyway.
First of all, we loved the series. It was just such a tremendous amount of love that went into it and work. And, thank you so much for sharing it with us. So Yvonne, did you want to start us off and introduce yourself?
I'm Yvonne Russo, and I'm the director and producer of Vow of Silence, the Assassination of Annie Mae. And my role as a director and producer is to lead story, basically be the architect for the project in terms of the visual elements and putting it all together, and also working alongside my producer, Amy Kaufman and Caroline Waterlow in terms of story and, just being the captain of the ship, I should say.
My name is Amy Kaufman. I am a producer and also an executive producer on Vow of Silence. And my role in this project involved sort of securing the rights, helping put together the team, working with Yvonne in developing subjects, and working on and trying to uncover archival to work with on this project, and securing Caroline Waterlow as a partner on the project.
I'm Caroline Waterlow, also an executive producer on the series. Yes, as Amy said, I have a small production company in Brooklyn, and our production company, Laylow Pictures, where it was the production entity for the project. So I came on early to help figure out, like, how do we make this? This is an amazing story, and sort of help find a home for it, build funding for it, find the right director for it, working around Amy and Yvonne in terms of the shoots they want to do, the interviews they want to do, the footage they want to pursue, and sort of being the touchstone for kind of a little bit of everything.
A lot.
Yeah, we all wear a lot of hats.
It's a massive undertaking. I was going to say that encapsulates a tiny bit because we're all really like multi-hyphenates, to be honest. But I have to say, to Caroline's credit, as the owner of Laylow Pictures, I don't know how she did it. Like, it was just like, it's such a massive project.
Just insane amount of archival footage you guys had to source. I saw how many editors you guys had in the credits. It's like unbelievable. And that is something that we do emphasize in our podcast, is being nimble in understanding how many roles one might have to play in a given project.
I do think documentaries are unique in that regard. There's never enough time or money. So we all just are like, you know what? I'm going to teach myself how to do that. And now I do that too.
There you go.
Just to backtrack a little bit, what was the first little inciting incident that, Amy came across this idea, or Yvonne came across this idea or the story, and how did it start?
So in this particular case, I had been reading a book, and come across the name of Annie Mae Pictou. And I was intrigued enough to just Google her name. And I mean, there's no shortage of blogs about her, personal blogs about her, news about her. And I just spent a night kind of reading her story. And I just thought that it was, first of all, a world that I knew nothing about, that all of this had really happened right where I grew up, and it wasn't history that I learned. What happened to her, it just really felt to me like the ultimate tragedy, and I was really intrigued by it. So just, it was, to make a long story short, I managed to find Annie Mae's daughter on Facebook, and she lives in Nova Scotia. And I decided to fly up and sit with her. And after that meeting, decided that this was a project that was really incredible and worth pursuing. And Denise also was really open to having this project, having this story made. And I only say that because this is a story that had been told in various iterations in the past. But there's specific reasons why this was really ripe for a retelling. And from that moment, I just went about the course of trying to figure out how to make this. And I had never made a documentary before. I actually have a background in scripted. So I knew right away that I needed a person who was just the best at documentary, at archival. And my first person I wanted was Caroline. So I actually went back to Facebook, which is incredibly useful, and found somebody that we knew in common, and got to meet Caroline, who came on board. And then obviously we knew the story needed to be helmed by an Indigenous filmmaker, an Indigenous woman filmmaker, and that's sort of where Yvonne came in to round up that team.
So Amy and Caroline approached me in 2018. So this project we've been carrying this project for 6 years, but it's also a project that I grew up with. I mean, it's a story that I grew up with. So I was 9 years old living on the Rosebud Reservation with my mom, who's a single mom at the time. And this was a time, it was just 4 years after Annie Mae's murder. And AIM was still pretty prominent. I always remembered her story as a kid growing up. But fast forward to 2018, I would never even imagine, like, coming back to her story, being approached to be a part of the story. And so, it took some meaningful consideration on my part because it's really close to home. So I made some phone calls back home and spoke to family and really stepped into Annie Mae's shoes and thinking, oh my God, like these places that she has been, like I slept in those places as a kid. I knew where she was. I knew the family she hung out with. There's an essence and a feeling that it's a trigger that's kind of within me that I understand her world. So afterwards, I decided, okay, like, yes, I'd love to take this on. I can take this on. And I knew it was going to be a massive project in terms of time. And so the questions were, am I willing to be like 100% committed? Because obviously you have to commit all your time, everything to the project to the end. So I said yes, and I knew it was a meaningful story. And after Amy went to see Denise, the next step for me was to have my time with Denise by myself, to go meet her in person and really just get to know her on a human level and just talking, having meals, sharing time together, meeting her family. And I asked her if she would take me around Nova Scotia to where Annie Mae grew up, and so I can get a sense of the land and just obtain trust from her. So that was really like the next step. And then by the end of our time together, it was like we both knew that it felt right. So it was like, okay, let's move forward. So that was my part in the first steps of it.
I'm so glad that you touched on that, because that was definitely one of our questions. The series is so authentic. You start these relationships. How do you build that trust? Were there any like hurdles that you had to overcome?
So this was the largest project I've ever worked on. I've been in the entertainment industry for some time as well, but I've worked for like National Geographic and Discovery and other directors as a producer. But for myself, the first trust was in Amy and Caroline because Caroline had her experience, with OJ Made in America and the projects that she's worked on. So was trusting that I would be guided, in to a certain degree. And then with Amy as a producer, it was understanding Amy and trusting Amy within story. And then also the community is really important. We all knew that this had to be voices of the women, like our women, Native women had to speak out because the AIM members were all male dominated and also prominent already. So there's this one AIM leader named Margot Thunderbird who's now passed away. The first thing was to obtain her trust also and to have support from AIM female leaders that were also Annie Mae's friends was imperative because if we didn't have that insight, then it would have been really difficult. So that was number one. And then once you have trust from one community member who's well known, then the doors start to open and the questions are, well, who's your family? Where are you from? And you're literally in the Native community, you're like 1 degree of separation, or really 0 degrees of separation from everybody. So they all know. So then it's sort of like, okay, like it's legit, we feel comfortable with this person telling the story. So that's kind of how it unfolds, at least from my perspective as the Native, director here.
I was just gonna say, coming from, so I'm not Indigenous myself, so I feel like in hindsight, I probably have a pretty great bloopers reel for trying to gain trust. Margot Thunderbird, who Yvonne mentioned, the first time I sat with her, she told me, you have a lot to learn, and she was right. Paul Demain told me, well, I'm not going to tell you this whole story. You do your research and then you come back. And he was also right. Small handful of people for a couple years had to decide that we weren't FBI agents. So I will say, like, the headline for me is, and I agree with this, as a non-native person entering into a world was very, very obvious that people had this expectation that you would do a lot of work before they even would engage with you. And obviously they're correct in that.
Documentaries have not always been great in their I mean, they've been terrible in their representation, certainly of Indigenous stories. And, there is a business to all of this, right? Which is time and money. And I think any project, you don't want to be the parachute in, parachute out, hey, I'm going to get off a plane, show up with a camera, talk to you, get the hell out. Like you just can't do that. In general, I don't think it's a good practice. The three of us talked a lot about integrity, healing, why are we here, right? And so trying to build that into the schedule and the budget and the network conversations was something that I really had to do. And I think we succeeded, but that's not really how Hollywood is built. And we also, really wanted to have as much Indigenous crew on the project as possible. We definitely spent time trying to build a production infrastructure around this idea of the trust building and the integrity and the healing we wanted to have happen in the project, but that's not always easy to do. So you have to be, I think, we have to be aligned in that, and we have to be forceful about what we need for the particular story you're working on. And that was the case in this project.
I'm glad you said that you have to be forceful. There's no negotiating. If you want the series, if you want it to have that authenticity and that depth and sensitivity and all of the things that make it so great. This is all before you actually started. It just shows like that you're building this stable, secure trust, foundation of trust with your subjects. As far as the next step goes, can you talk a little bit about what that kind of first day, that first moment when you started production?
We were funded, and Amy can talk about the grant writing process because it was really extensive. But we had applied for, the IDA and Sundance and the Redford Center and Fork Films and Nia Taro. So with raising money in bits and pieces, we were able to shoot a little bit, travel a little bit, do the groundwork in order to start to lay the foundation for this before we really broke the story, just so you know. And Amy can talk, but I think this is important also for your audience because it's not
Yeah.
we just pitched a story and then suddenly Onyx Collective said, okay, we're going to greenlight this. This is
Yeah.
a lot of like rolling up sleeves and doing a lot of sweat equity work, to get the project funded in this sort of like, in the grant funding world.
In order to get money, you needed something to show. And in order to have something to show, you need to have money. There is the conundrum, this idea that you're going to make this proof of concept and that's going to help you get money. And how are you going to pay for this? So really, the way it was explained to me, and actually the way that it worked for us in practice, was that we found our first person that would take a chance with us. And it happened to be 9 stories. And 9 stories gave us some seed money. I think we applied to every single grant under the sun that we might qualify for. And we would take our proof of concept and we would have a lot of conversations and we were so excited, and then nothing would move forward. And we really reached a point where we heard from the marketplace quite clearly that no one was financing this as a series. And at best, we thought we would get to make it as a feature. I mean, you can't even script what happened to us. We, at the last minute, got a call from an executive at Onyx, John Robinson, who had known about the project in a previous iteration and sort of called Caroline to check in on the project. And that was really, she felt passionate about it, and Onyx was ready to greenlight it as a series. So it's sort of like a walk, and then run kind of situation.
Yeah. We don't learn enough about Indigenous history in our education system. And I grew up in Canada the first part of my life. And I didn't know that Annie Mae is from Nova Scotia. I actually spent summers in Nova Scotia when I was a kid, and I knew nothing. So, there's just so much context that makes the story resonate in such a different way. And so this is a person who we were trying to flesh out as a real person whose kind of agency had been lost in the story of the murder. And so again, just being strongly convicted about what you're trying to make, I think we were getting to a place where it's like, well, we're going to just make whatever we get to make, but the series is what we wanted. And so pushing on for all that time to find all that archival and all the story amounts, because to prove that it was series worthy, I think was really important.
So that's where we're leaving off today. We have part 2 coming up. So part 2 is going to be more in depth about how they built the story out, what Yvonne's process was like, understanding the elements that go into making a documentary as large as this.
And it was such an interesting process. And just as they were putting all of the pieces together for the series, they had a little bit of a curveball thrown their way. It's worth a listen for sure. If you're interested in documentaries, if you're just interested in learning about documentaries, A Vow of Silence, The Assassination of Annie Mae.
It's a 4-part series on Hulu, and we hope that you guys can watch.
If you're interested in learning more about 101, check out our website, www.101podcast.com.
Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, all at 101 Podcast.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.